Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cheryl Holder. If you look at her bio on here, she is, you can see that she's a person who's dedicated to service and standing up for those who are disadvantaged. I had she has worked in the area of infectious disease in Miami. She worked for HIV, in the HIV population. She then worked at the Herbert Wertheim College, where she taught social determinants of health diversity and impact of climate change. She retired 2 years ago, too young to retire. Look at her. She, along with Dr. Fu and Dr. Basal, yes, Dr. Basal, who you heard from, they started the, thank you, the Florida, what is it? Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, yes, thank you. Dr. Holder.
Thank you for having me. I have to thank Bob and Rick and just the enthusiasm and passion that I feel when I talk to you on the phone. And then I heard some of the statistics of what Sarasota has endured in the last 2 years. And I wish you well on your healing journey because we know the impact. We build our resilience through these situations. But our goal in today and the title and what I was given, how do we thwart these? And what preemptive plan are we going to have? So let me get my slide here. Let's see. I don't have any disclosures, and again, also same thing with no funding. I do have stock photo, and I think that's about it. But in preemptive planning, think about it. You're asking what plan, what strategic way are we going to take this problem? How are we going to provide our communities and everybody on this planet a way to live long, healthful lives free from air pollution? And if they do have air pollution, how do we find ways to adapt and improve the situation? And how can we ensure that in doing that, we improve the health of ourselves and our planet? Huge task. And when you think of it in terms of strategic planning and problems, we often call these things wicked problems, where they're complex, they bring many uncertainties, there are many stakeholders, and many changes. And sometimes the solution we have unearths another problem. And sometimes the solution worsens a problem. So what solutions are we? And we want to frame these solutions in terms of better, best, they change. So we often can't get the very beautiful answer. This is true, this is false, we should do this, we should do that. You're wrong, we're right. It's an evolving scenario. And that's what wicked problems do. And climate change is a wicked problem for our planet because will we choose and find the right solutions? You do that on a day-to-day basis. In thinking of preemptive planning, I think of what I do every day for 40 years since I've been a doctor. Is how do I prevent these things from happening? And I prevent it from the first time where it doesn't happen at all, or if it happens, that you don't make it worse. And so when we think of preemptive planning, that's what we do. I often start my presentations with anime, because that's the stock photo, but she represents so much of the patients that I cared for. And in her one story, and all my patients tell stories, and you have tons of stories, and I want you to share your stories with everyone and how what you've experienced in the last 2 years being in Sarasota, which have been amplified by our climate change, how did that impact you? Share that story. Because Miss Anime, when she came into me in 2016, I was a busy clinician, and back then we did full physicals and new patients. So my nurses knew if a patient walks in, the best time to see that patient is right when I'm changing rooms to another patient while the patient is getting undressed and I go back and do a physical. So she brought Anime in, and Anime has always been my regular, really good patient. Lots of medical problems, as you see, chronic diseases, She's older, she's on a medicine that the air impacts her tremendously. And the air and the heat impacted her. But how did she come to me, really? Her big problem was paying her light bill. She had the other chronic diseases, which we know, if you heard, everything today impacts climate. It came from the worsening of our planet. But she comes into us with an inability to pay her bill. And so when in the emergency room, they'll see the acute impact of what the planet changes and the warming has done. When you're sitting in your office, and this is 8 years ago, and this has been ongoing because we have cancer alleys sitting next to all the pollution that the oil factories and all the different factories have produced for at least 30 years in this country. And when you look at it worldwide, we have the impact of pollution. So we have our data, we have our understanding, but when it shows up to you, it shows up to you in a different way where I went, aha. And Oprah calls that aha moment. That's that moment when you unlearn so much. And I unlearned that Miss Anna Mae's complaint of her shortness of breath and needing asthma inhalers, underneath that tip of the iceberg laid a huge amount of problems that we now tackle every day with our overheated planet. And she presented with paying her light bill. And then when I look at what is driving our planet, you guys have heard it, but you gotta think when you're solving this problem in planning, where is it coming from? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that I'm going to have to bring into this? And when we look at our planet, transportation is driving it, agriculture, construction, generating electricity. You heard about healthcare, that we are so huge in the problem when you look on the industry. And in Florida, agriculture is much higher than the generation of electricity and what's driving our pollution. So if we're going to think of who is at risk, where is it coming from? I do this picture because of this young man here, because you already know that children are the highest risk. And then, of course, Black males and females have a lot more asthma. And then you wonder why this happens, and you heard about the ground level ozone. I thank all my previous speakers for laying out the healthcare. So you guys are pretty experienced now in understanding this, because you've heard it at least 3-4 times this afternoon. And when you look at who else are the other stakeholders and who's getting the huge impact, you saw 26% for allergies in the US and who gets exposed, but it's not equally distributed. And that's the understanding we need, is that some communities are impacted more. And those communities happen to live closer to the problem, live closer to the highways, live closer to the factories, and all the things that we know not in my backyard produces in this country. And so you will see much higher levels of all the illnesses in these communities. Now, I bring this up not in terms of, oh, poor thing. Yes, it is, oh, poor thing, but it's also a full understanding of what our challenges are, because we got a problem to solve. And so unless we fully understand, some people are impacted more than others, we're those people, who are all the people producing and what we're doing to produce it, how are we going to solve it? In particular, the largest growing population in this country, the Latin population, they're increasingly in the communities, in the states, are very impacted by heat, climate change, and then pollution. So as we look at our solutions, we're going to have to understand the opinions of all these different folks, and they may not be as literate as we've become since this morning, and I'm incredible with the amount of presentations that we've had and how much learning we've done. But think of these populations who may not speak English. Do they really understand it? But to solve this problem, we do need to figure that out. And so we know what makes us ill. I wish it were just our genetics, because that would be so much easier to solve, because we're doing great work on finding the epigenetics and the genetics, and you heard what Dr. Volker talked about in our innovations. But it's really much more where you live, where you work, where you play, your basic way that you're going to get access to money and power. And then we look at the policies that comes from all this access to money and power and where you're living, and then we come up with policies. And many times these policies could go back hundreds of years. But they still have the interplay, because like I said, a wicked problem unearths other problems, unearths the histories, and we've heard incredible history today that shows how it builds up. And in 1619, a group of people went to a certain part of the continent of another part of our planet and took people to bring into another part of our continent and created a system of economics which then created people who are valued more and people who are valued less, and distributed opportunities and wealth based on this valuation. That valuation continues today. And I show this that these structures that were developed in who gets valued and who gets opportunities and who got our education have resulted in how you access growth. How do you access wealth? And again, the people we call race, because there is only one race, we're all human race, and what you're seeing is a play on environment in when the changes in how people function in this world. So this is 2018, 2023 data isn't very much different, so I didn't change the slide because it was just too difficult. But it's basically to tell you that the groups that are having a lot of problems don't have the money to adapt easily. And if we live in our society that it will require us to adapt, how are we going to pay for the adaptation for so many people? This is an example of what happened because that policy in 1619 didn't just impact the US, it impacted the world. It impacted how we create and extract resources from other areas and use those resources in one way. And over the Industrial Revolution, we created all this pollution and warmed our planet. A lot of adaptation, not a lot of money. Solutions. Multiple solutions because it's a wicked problem. And every solution is going to come with somebody's opinion that that is not good and that is not what we want. And we hear it every day in our discourse in our nation and in the world. But that is part of what happens with these kind of problems. I love this slide. I got it during COVID because this is truly how wicked problems are going to be evolved. Because I may never solve it fully, but we hope we do, because if we don't solve this problem, the planet will survive, but we may not be here. But it does require multiple layers, multiple ways between what our society does and what you do. Miracle, Madison, Dr. Miracle, showed us so many things that clinicians can do. Everybody here, you learn ways that you can interact in our environment and what you can do. But in COVID, they broke it down, but the basic thing is that lots of solutions, you're gonna have pushback on some of them, you keep fighting forward, and that person will stay alive. So when you look at transportation, lots of the solutions are current and are available and are being studied. Electrification, I love electrification of transportation, why? Pollution is driving the health impacts of so many people. We tackle the electrification, we decrease pollution from transportation, we tackle 29%. Lots of ways to tackle electrification, tackle how transportation. If we built cities differently, we would be able to not use our cars everywhere we gotta go. There's so many ways to do this right here, right now, and there's a lot of data that shows these things are effective. Electrification of transportation, you could do it, there's solar ways of getting the battery powers, doesn't all have to be electrical linked, just lots of different ways. Mass transit was not taken in Florida, but that's another way that's used effectively in many parts of the world. Walkable cities, again, we talked about them. Many in Europe, many here in the US are looking at that concept. More in electricity generation, we really have to get rid of coal power plants if we're gonna do this with air pollution. And this is where political will comes in to move towards renewable energy. There's no such thing as clean coal. You saw those particles produced, you're inhaling them, the next generation is inhaling them. That's just facts. But again, solutions are here. You will have pushback as how much we're going to fight. Nuclear energy, you have to fight about that too. The facts with nuclear energy, it is one of the cleanest ways to generate electricity and generate enough of it to run our AI computers, which is now the push. Unfortunately, my anime would love that we'd have thought about some way to solve the problem that gave her better health and better living conditions, but really it seems to pressure to solve our AI problem by nuclear energy. It is cleanest. The cost is up front, it's to make it, it's the time, but once it gets going, it doesn't really break down as much, and it does generate with cleaner energy. You do have the problem afterwards with cleanup. But I throw it out there because you're going to hear this is a solution, and you're going to have to decide, do you want a solution that is 10 years, 20 years, or you want in 5 years, 6 years, looking at the calculation that if we hit that 3 degrees or 1.5, too many years in a row, we may tip over with the melting of sea ice, rising of sea level, and more of these storms that you're going to have to deal with year after year, and then the next generation have a huge amount of cleanup. So we're going to have to look at that. Hydrogen also has a potential to be clean. The way it's being done now releases more toxins than it does. But that's, again, future use, and that may bring us some cleaner energy. When we look at sustainability initiatives in industry, I use this for healthcare because we have 3 scopes. And the one scope is that indirect, where all the transportation, all the, like right out here, when you look at when you eat, look how much single-use plastic we use today. Look at how much footprint we create just to do the healthcare. And then within healthcare, all the things that we do. The IV fluid crisis, I see it as an opportunity because we're suddenly not putting bags. They used to have a practice that between shifts, that the bag is halfway up and the nurses just put up a new bag, and a lot of waste. We can't afford to waste the IV bags, and they've come up with really ways to monitor usage and decrease waste. And that's an opportunity in the healthcare system overall. But sustainable initiatives are needed. We have to track our greenhouse gases because that will improve the planet and improve our health. We cannot continue to inhale all these particles, continue to have worsening asthma rates, COPD, and cancers. Again, agriculture, 10%, lots of different ways that we can work on our agriculture, from the way we stop tilling the soil, putting back the heavy duty. If you're gonna go with meat, there are ways to make that a lot healthier. I recommend moving away from meat because of the cholesterol level and what it has physiologically. All the data clearly shows that it's an inflammatory product, and if you really want better health, you do mostly plants. So just eating properly will get you that bang for your buck without even changing. I mean, we'll just end up with less cows because we're chopping down a lot of forests to feed the cows. So that's another push in terms of agriculture. But sustainable agricultural practices, which often came from the indigenous people, many of those practices showed how it caused more carbon sequestration in the soil than what we are current practices. So there are many steps forward. Our pesticide use, it kills us, and we're spending a ton of money organic, but if you look at how pesticide gets released into the air, especially as it gets hotter, again, toxins, cancer. So there are many things within agriculture we can do. Commercial, residential, my gosh, there's so much stuff. Smart services, you heard about the white roofs. There's so many innovations, especially with AI. We can now, with monitoring our patient asthma sensors, if anyone wants to invest in it, every time there was something happening and the sensors, and they would pump, and it would link to a sensor, which would then link to a center in the hospital that shows that something in our environment is sending off the asthma attacks because we're seeing an increased use of the albuterol. That's possible. We can monitor these things. There's so many really good sensors out there that we can do in the community, in the home, to link it with the healthcare. Portable air purifiers, electric, just many, many solutions. Building energy efficiency, the data is clear. The more energy efficient we make our buildings, the healthier they are, the less pollution, the more lives we save. And again, we get the policy. Lots of different policies. You've heard of carbon offsets, which is where they put aside certain amount of the profit, certain amount of what they're doing in an industry, like Kaiser. Kaiser's gone zero. They could now sell offsets because they're going into that positive range to other groups that are more polluting, and they buy the offsets and balance it out. That doesn't get you to net zero, but it does help to control it. Really, the fastest way to get down is carbon tax. And we know nobody's going to tax anything, but that really is the fastest way. You tax stuff, people stop misusing. There's tons of evidence, and all this evidence that you see in these articles demonstrate that building efficiency, electric vehicles, decreasing pollution, improve the health, decrease the amount of carbon, improves health outcomes. But again, who are we saving our Earth for? Now, later, humans, now or later. There's so many other things on our planet than humans, and I think if we moved less humans, we would maintain the diversity across our plants, our animals, our insects, because that all comes together to make the human life experience much better. We're gonna spend money, we're gonna make money. And again, we talk about saving the planet, and that's not our issue because our planet will live. How do we do it? I come back to anime because anime has the solution that I like. Now, you're going to get pushback from it because I already said you know that this is a wicked problem. But I noticed, and I've looked overall, had we paid attention and addressed the needs of the folks who are the canary in the coal mine. I did a TED Talk, and my line when I wrote it, I said, when the canary in the coal mine shows up, is something we're doing to our environment that's happening to them now, but in a matter of time, it'll be you. Anime 8 years ago spoke. Communities with cancer spoke. Air pollution kills. We have a lot of information now. We just need to move the policy and move that political will and the community will, implement some of these things. They may not be perfect, but we will improve. Thank you.